Good afternoon and welcome. I'd like to call the Committee on Commerce and Labor to order. Welcome all those here in Carson City, those in attendance down in Las Vegas, the Sawyer Building, anyone watching online. As always, our Nellis system available through our website has all the materials that we're reviewing today. We have work session documents posted and available online. Those are the documents that we're going to be working from today. We do have a work session with 2 bills, and then we'll be moving into a hearing on 2 bills. Depending on our fluid schedule that we have here in the last 24 hours, we may have to recess and come back to accommodate other business. But with that, just a couple quick reminders. Please silence all portable communications devices. We do not take testimony during work sessions. However, we may have folks come up at the request of the chair to clarify any questions, and if so, be sure to identify yourself for the record. And with that, Madam Secretary, if you could please call the roll.
Mrs. Bustamante Adams? Here. Mrs. Carlton? Here. Mr. Daly? Here. Mrs. Diaz? Here. Mr. Ellison? Here. Mr. Frierson? Here. Mr. Grady? Here. Mr. Hanson? Here. Mr. Hardy? Here. Mr. Healy? Here. Mr. Horn? Here. Mrs. Kirkpatrick? Here. Mr. Livermore? Here. Mr. Orenshaw? Here. Chairman Bobzien.
Here. Looks like we've got everybody today. It's good that we'll need that for work session, and then we may have people coming in and coming out during the hearings, because I know we have other meetings going on and other bill presentations. I myself have one to make in a little bit. So with that, we're going to go ahead into our work session and begin with Senate Bill 479.
For the record, this is Kelly Richard, Senior Research Analyst with the Legislative Council Bureau. Senate Bill 479 was heard in committee on May 29th. The bill revises provisions governing credits against the insurance premium tax. The bill authorizes an insurer to carry forward credits against the premium tax paid for its policies of industrial insurance. The credits do not expire and may be carried forward into subsequent years until entirely used.
Okay, committee, this was a very recent hearing. What's the pleasure of the committee? I have a 2 pass from Assemblyman Daly. Do we have a second? Second. Second by Mr. Orenshaw. Any discussion on the motion? Okay, seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed?
I would like to, I'm going to oppose, but I'm going to
Okay, thank you, sir. And with that, let's see. Mr. Hardy, could you handle that one for us on the floor?
Sure.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay, we'll go now to Senate Bill 123.
Senate Bill 123 was heard in committee on May 27th, sponsored by Senator Atkinson and Mr. Bobzien. It revises provisions relating to energy. The bill requires certain electric utilities to file with the PUCN a comprehensive plan for emissions reductions from coal-fired electric generating plants and for the replacement of such plants with increased capacity from renewable energy facilities and other electric generating plants. The measure prescribes the minimum requirements of such plants, including the retirement or elimination of not less than 800 megawatts of coal-fired electric generating capacity on or before December 31, 2019, the construction or acquisition of or contracting for 350 megawatts of electric generating capacity from renewable energy facilities, and the construction or acquisition of 550 megawatts of electric capacity from other electric generating plants. The measure provides for the recovery of certain costs incurred by an electric utility in carrying out an emissions reduction and capacity replacement plan, prescribes the power and duties of the Division of Environmental Protection of the State Department of Conservation and Natural Resources with respect to such a plan. If the PUCN deems inadequate any portion of the plan or amendment, the PUCN may recommend a modification to the plan, and the utility may accept the modification or withdraw the proposed plan or amendment. The PUCN is also required to have a hearing to review and accept or modify such a plan. Finally, the bill requires that any order issued by the PUCN accepting an element of such a plan must authorize a utility to construct or acquire and own electric generating plants necessary to implement it. There is an amendment attached for your review submitted by Mr. Hanson. The amendment deletes references in the bill to the utility constructing or acquiring new electric generating plants as part of the plan. It also authorizes the PUCN to approve any carrying charges or interest recorded in a regulatory asset.
Okay, committee, certainly this bill has been the subject of a lot of work and a lot of focus and a lot of attention And so I think we can have a little bit of a discussion here before we go ahead. I just want to kick it off by saying that, I think it's important to remember the public policy goal that we're trying to achieve here, and that is the retirement of coal assets. My hope and my ask to the company is that with all the moving parts with this bill, I do hope that the emissions reductions plan, the piece of this, gets moving very quickly. That's where the biggest win is here, and that's what I want to see happen quickly so we can move forward. Members of the public may be aware of a bill that we're going to be presenting shortly in the Senate Commerce, Labor, and Energy Committee, Assembly Bill 428, which is now including a legislative committee on energy. And so as this moves forward, that committee will be watching all the moving parts with this bill. But with that, we'll open it up to conversation, polite conversation. Mr. Hansen, you have an amendment that you wish to present?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much. It's been a very interesting bill to get involved in, I have to say. I've learned a great deal. The policy side of it, I don't have any problem with the idea that we should be slowly moving away from coal. Well, it is a little bit ironic. I think that one of your goals over time, Mr. Chairman, was to see that, make sure we had a diversification of fuels to help ensure that the ratepayers weren't stuck with one, and that's still a concern. The bigger concern was between the NVEnergy and the ratepayer, the real only protection for the rank and file people that pay the bills is the PUC. So I met with the consumer advocate, and then on his suggestion, I made the arrangements to get a hold of the staff that were the PUC folks, met with them. They were very concerned. They felt that the hearings previous to our first hearing were inadequate, and that the needs of the ratepayers had simply not been addressed in this bill. I met with several other people as well who raised substantial and legitimate concerns. So after meeting with the staff folks, I requested these amendments. These amendments are based on the recommendations from the PUC folks that were visiting with me. And again, my concern, and I will, as I requested, I will bring one of them up here to help answer any of the reasoning behind what they are trying to do in this bill. I think as a policy for our state, if there's any question or any doubt as to which side we should come down on when it comes to the ratepayers versus an energy company that's a monopoly, I think we should always side on the side of caution in protecting the consumer. And that's really what the amendments are trying to ensure remains in place. So with your permission, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to invite up, I can never say his name correctly,
I'll invite Mr. Lamojo up to
Thank
come
you.
up. And I think it's important to note that the PUC staff have been definitely a part of this process. I appreciated talking with them early on when the Envision concept was rolled out. I do know that on the Senate side, the work that was done in this bill and some of the changes that were made were in response to concerns that PUC staff raised early on. And in my own conversations with the Public Utilities Commission, I think it's important to note also that the Commission has not taken a position on this current reprint of the bill, and so as such, this is neutral testimony at this point, but certainly clarification of technical concerns and issues that you want to have addressed, Mr. Hansen, that's absolutely appropriate.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would point out that in the testimony in our first hearing, they also testified in neutral. And I have to get on the record, too. I think it is unfair to they should be very comfortable coming before a committee like this to be able to testify. Their job is to help protect the ratepayers. I think there's been a tremendous amount of pressure to try to keep them, frankly, from being in front of a group like this. I would state that a United States Senator actually criticized them in public for daring to come
Mr. Hansen,
and participate in neutral.
I appreciate that, but I think at this point, particularly
Okay,
with
well, let's
staff
go.
at the table, we should go to technical concerns rather than the broader political considerations. Good afternoon, Mr. Lamojo. And Mr. Hanson, did you have specific things that you wanted him to walk through on your amendment?
Do you have a copy of the bill?
He's not technically presenting the amendment because
No,
it's your
I think
amendment.
for the edification of the committee, I think it would be wise because he is a person that's in the field that understands this. I'm not, so I'm uncomfortable trying to explain the specifics of why the PUC staff would like to have these amendments. So
Certainly.
Chairman and committee members, thank you. For the record, Don Lamolho, Utilities Hearing Officer with the PUC. And for the record, I just want to be clear as to the genesis of the amendment. Mr. Hanson is correct. Mr. Hanson did invite myself and Anne Marie Cuneo to his office last Thursday to talk about SB123. Mr. Hanson did express some concerns about the bill. We listened to those concerns. He asked how can those concerns be addressed. We offered him several options. We were not involved in the actual drafting of this amendment. Mr. Hanson did show us the amendment last week, and I did pull up the work session document this morning. This is not a staff amendment. This was, we addressed Mr. Hanson's concerns and offered him options how to address those concerns. As to, I can speak to the effect of Mr. Hanson's amendment. If you look at the changed language he suggests on page 3, and that is section 7, sub 2C, D, and subsection 3 of subsection 7, of section 7, sorry. The effect there is to remove the reference to the 550 megawatts of replacement capacity and related facilities, and also the hedging component that would be related to any natural gas build-out. On the next page, page 4, there's a continuation of deletions regarding the 550 megawatts of replacement capacity. On section 9, the deletion and addition of language there would result in commission discretion over carrying charges, which is interest that would be included in any regulatory asset that would result from this bill. On page 15 of the proposed amendment, there is another proposed deletion, and that would delete subsection 6 of section 17, which would again relate to the 550 megawatts of replacement capacity. The effect of the deletions regarding replacement capacity would be to place any and all decisions regarding any necessary replacement capacity within the existing integrated resource planning process as it would normally be taken up.
Okay, and so Mr. Hanson, do you want to give us kind of the policy intent by doing this? I mean, that's certainly the technical walkthrough, but can you sum up what you believe this amendment achieves?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think the amendment achieves keeping the PUC in the regulatory position they need to be in and making sure they have the authority to protect the ratepayers as this process moves forward. My understanding is this is somewhere between a $750 million and $1 billion decision. And for us as legislators, with our very limited time and understanding of these issues, to make these kind of decisions and remove these sorts of decisions from the people who, in fact, have the staff, the understanding, and the capability to do it, as well as the mandate to make sure that the rate holders are protected. That's my concern. So after meeting with them, that's the purpose of these deletions. They felt that if these were removed, this bill, which would allow the policy of removing coal to go forward, would allow the needed additions to energy plants to be allowed, but would also make sure that in the process, the ratepayers in particular, not the stockholders, would be paramount in the decision-making process. And that's the purpose of these amendments.
Okay, well, while we have PUC staff up here, and again, making it clear that this is Mr. Hanson's amendment and not PUC's, do we have any questions for Mr. Lamojo? Mrs. Carlton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I did not see this as removing the PUC, the regulator on this particular issue. I think they're still going to be involved. It may not be at the same level. I think the biggest concerns that we heard, they were not from the PUC, they were from the consumer advocate, which was very appropriate, that the consumer advocate would come to us and share their concerns, though that we get all sides of this story. I think the PUC, as the regulator, has been very fair and honest in answering all the direct questions that we've asked them, and I would never want to put a regulator in a position of either support or opposition, because their job is basically to implement the policy that this committee sees is best for the state and for our constituents. So I appreciate all the hard work that they've done and the position that they've been put in on this. It can be very difficult, and I'm glad the consumer advocate came forward and shared their concerns, but I also know that as we move forward in this new era of energy, things are going to have to be done differently. And one of the things that I heard was, well, if you just push this off for a couple of years, there shouldn't be an issue. Well, it takes 2 to 3 years to get one of these things geared up and ready to go through the whole regulatory process. So if the energy isn't needed now, it definitely will be needed in the next 2 to 3 years. And if we don't act proactively to do something about this, our folks are going to be left holding the bag the way they were in the Enron crisis. And the last thing I want to do is have that hit our constituents again, because we were held hostage on the spot market for electricity. It is going to be a new world. People are a little apprehensive of this, but I think enough protections have been put in with the Legislative Oversight Committee, all the other energy bills that we have done. I think we've accomplished our mission on this, Mr. Chairman. There's probably a few more things I'd like to add, but, not going to do that. I'll leave it alone. But I think we still have the oversight and involvement that's going to be needed to protect our constituents on this.
Do we have additional questions for Mr. Lamojo while we have him at the table? Mr. Hanson, did you have?
No more questions for him. The consumer advocate was actually involved in this, and I'd like to get his opinion on these amendments, if it's okay with you, Mr. Chairman, since he's here.
Okay, we can call up Mr. Jacobson while he's here. Mr. Lamojo, did you have any additional items you wanted to get on the record on this during the work session?
Just briefly, I just wanted to clarify the Commission's role in regulating utilities, and that is to balance the interests of shareholders and ratepayers. We are not there to simply protect ratepayers, so I just wanted to make that clear. We are balancing.
Absolutely. That is sort of the nature of regulated energy 101 right there. Mrs. Kirkpatrick.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I want to be clear, though, there's still a regulatory process that we have to go through, and the Ledge Commission will see a lot of these regulations, correct?
I believe that regulations would be necessary to implement SB123, and that would come before the Legislative Commission. Correct.
Okay. I mean, I just think there's another bite at the apple. I think with the study that we've, not a study as much as a statutory committee for oversight, that does continue to keep the process alive and well. And one of the strikeouts that I seen was, and I'm trying to understand what difference that it makes, and we've been round and round in this, and Section 11 was where I was most concerned, and that's the piece that talks about the mitigation. I feel comfortable knowing that we can come back to session and make some changes if necessary, because I think that the mitigation, I'm worried about what happens after June 2018, and I think that there's an opportunity for us to have this statutory committee on an ongoing basis for 3 to 4 sessions to keep in the forefront of this discussion of the new way we do energy in our state. 2018, there's another session or two in between, so I believe that this issue isn't probably going to go away as much as we need to stay on top of what's going on, and that's why I believe the statutory committee, the regulations will be able, on the Ledge Commission, to be able to make sure the intent of the legislation was put out there. And I'm the first person, and I've worked with both of you on ratepayers, making sure there's that balance, because at the end, we can't have people not having to choose to pay their power bills. So the one section that you got that was crossed out is on page 3, line 34. So I'm wondering how does that help ratepayers by taking that provision out?
For the record, Don Lamolho, as I stated earlier, the effect of the deletions of all the deletions on page 3 is to remove any mandatory reference to 550 megawatts of replacement capacity. The Commission would not have a choice in approving that replacement capacity under this bill. This places that decision completely within the resource planning process.
So, Mr. Chairman, if you don't mind me following up, though, so on page 2, section 7, lines 29, but the the request for proposals break it down into 100, 100, 100, so that there is some time frame within there that we'll still be able to come back within the session to monitor that piece. Is that not correct?
For the record, Don Lamolho, the reference on page 2, 7 to B 1, 2, 3, and 4 are references to renewable energy RFPs.
And I get that, but the 550 is what we're trying to replace. So they're replacing it with this? No?
The 550 megawatts, as stated in the bill, is intended to replace the coal capacity that would be retired. The question there, on a technical basis, is whether all of that capacity is needed to replace that retired coal capacity.
Okay, so we have Mr. Jacobson here. Mr. Hansen, did you have a technical question to raise with him?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. As a matter of fact, I do. I had gone over these proposed amendments with him, and he was comfortable with it. I also have, as a potential conceptual amendment, one that he also brought to me that has not yet been released on Nellis, to see what happens with this one first. And we can go over that one possibly as well. But I would just simply like his take, since he is the consumer advocate that Assemblywoman Carlton mentioned was kind of a key player in this, his take on the need for these these amendments, whether or not you're comfortable with them, if you see them as a necessity, and your job is protecting the consumer.
I'm Dan Jacobson with the Bureau of Consumer Protection. I would agree, Assemblyman Hansen, through the chairman, that the amendment that you've proposed kind of goes all the way to assure that the Commission has the full flexibility to decide what's needed in terms of replacing coal. Your amendment would essentially say to the company, they need to go into the Commission with a full filing with all the information that they normally submit to try to justify just what kind of replacement is needed. And so I think that would be very consumer protection oriented and would be very helpful. There was mention of the fact that we had submitted an amendment, and I would be happy to contrast that amendment with what you have proposed here, if that would be helpful.
Follow up, Mr. Chair?
Okay, so we have an issue here.
No, I'm not bringing it up right now. I'm not going to. I just want to stay with.
We have an amendment that's not on Nellis. With apologies to Mr. Jacobson. Mr. Jacobson and I had discussed that amendment. It was not submitted for the work session today, unfortunately. So now we have a challenge that. So if we could discuss something in concept, and you can present that, but we do not have an amendment on Nellis to discuss in addition. So, Mr. Hansen, is that?
Yeah, that's fine at this point. Mr. Chairman, I would like to make sure the record reflects that in the best interest of the consumer, these amendments that I propose are what Mr. Jacobson thinks this committee should go forward with. Is that
so? Mr. Hansen, I'm going to step in here and kind of clarify what the consumer advocate's role is, because I've spent a lot of time on this particular issue as well. And Mr. Jacobson and I have had some long conversations about their statute, the Consumer Advocate statute. And if you haven't seen it before, I really recommend it. I don't have the exact citation, but there is broad discretion and latitude on behalf of the consumer advocate to actually represent the public interest, which is much broader than particular consumer classes and then individual classes. So that's another issue, but there is a broader public interest that is represented by the consumer advocate as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would just point out, though, that combined, I think they do represent a very, very broad and specific public interest.
Okay, so Mr. Jacobson, did you want to just give us the quick heads up on that, and then we can...
Sure. I think it's helpful to think of it this way. The amendment that you've proposed is pretty aggressive because it essentially says that while the legislature is adopting a policy to close the coal plants and a policy to adopt a certain amount of renewables, the legislature is not adopting a policy that says the company will get to build 550 megawatts, likely of natural gas, although it doesn't specify that. So your amendment would essentially say the legislature is going to stop at the retirement of the coal plants and the addition of the renewables and let the company come in through the normal process to the PUC and make their showing about what else is needed. A less aggressive approach, one that perhaps is more consistent with the deal that was constructed on the other house, would be to allow the policy from the legislature to say, okay, there will be 350 megawatts of renewables to replace coal, and there'll be 550 megawatts of something else, likely natural gas, but you could specify that the commission gets to determine the timing of when that, it's probably a major power plant. The last time they built one, it was $700 million of investment. And so, again, from a policy perspective, I think it's your task to decide which approach you want to use. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any additional technical questions on this matter? And again, we are not rehearing this bill. This is a work session, so if we have specific questions as to the bill, as to the policy implications, we can cover those. But again, this is not rehearing the bill. Okay, seeing none, go ahead and take a motion at this time. Mr. Horn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. After much debate, and it seems that Chairman in the Senate, Senator Atkinson, and yourself worked tirelessly on this issue. It's impressive the number of stakeholders you have on board with this as well. I think we had some compromise. I would make a motion to do pass if you'd entertain that motion, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, we have a motion to do pass by Mr. Horn. Do we have a second by Mrs. Carlton? Discussion on the motion. Mr. Ellison.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I still have some concerns with the bill. I did meet with some people for a few seconds right before the meeting. I'm going to follow up with some of the information I'm still trying to obtain, but I'm going to vote no, but I do want to reserve my rights to change it on the floor. I know we're going the opposite direction, but there's still some concerns I've got there, and it's also pertaining to Section 3, I think it's Section 11 on rates. So I'll get with them and be working with them on that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Ellison. We have Mr. Livermore and then Mr. Hanson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I, too, are going to vote no on this bill because I believe it's sort of like buying a $10 million life insurance policy, and unless a company makes you have a medical exam, you're likely not going to buy it. I don't believe that this has been vetted thoroughly yet. I believe the Public Utility Commission should have more oversight of the replacement plan and, of course, the resource needed that was identified. And when we had the hearing, Mr. Chairman, we spent a couple hours on this, but the proponents of it had the majority of that testimony. I don't think we gave the public full opportunity
Mr. Livermore, I take some offense at that. We
I'm
had
sorry
a
for that,
very
then.
long, in-depth hearing. We heard a lot of testimony on all sides of this.
Well, Mr. Chairman, that's my reason for going to vote no. And I will reserve my right to change my vote on the floor if I do.
Okay, Mr. Hanson?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Of course, I'll be a no vote, but I was wondering if the chair would entertain the conceptual amendment proposed by consumer advocate Jacobson.
Sir, we have a motion on the floor right now, so no.
Okay. I do want the record to reflect that I think the pressure that was put on the PUC, where they were literally threatened, having their power reduced, was absolutely uncalled for and had a chilling effect on what should have been an open, free, public discussion on this. So I think that needs to be part of the record. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So do you have some specifics on that? Do you have... I mean, it's a characterization.
Would you like me to read it into the record, Mr. Chairman? Here's exactly what I'm talking about. The PUC has been critical of the legislation, arguing it puts too much risk on ratepayers to shoulder the cost of constructing the plants and limits the Commission's ability to oversee the plan. That opposition riled United States Senator Harry Reid, who has pushed for years to eliminate coal-fired plants. They raised hell here, the legislature, because it was taking away their power, Reid said. Well, I think we need to take more power away from this little bureauctitle that I think has done a lot to hinder the development of renewable energy rather than help it.
How about we do this? Do you just want to cite the title of the article and the media outlet, and we can move on?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. This was Harry Reid lambast PUC for standing in the way of the Nevada Energy Bill by Anjanette Damon, and I believe it was the Las Vegas Sun, May 29th of this year.
Okay, thank you. Do we have additional discussion on the motion? Okay, seeing none, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Nay. No. Okay, I have a show of hands for the noes. Let's see, who we got? Okay, we got Mr. Livermore, we got Mr. Hardy, we got Mr. Ellison, we got Mr. Hanson, and Mr. Grady. Okay, thank you. Motion carries. And Mrs. Carlton, would you be willing to do the floor? You know what? I'm going to do the floor statement on this one. Okay, very good. And with that, we're going to go ahead and close the work session and open up our hearing on Assembly Bill 504 and welcome the Minority Leader to the Assembly Commerce and Labor Committee.